Welcome to Honest HR. I'm your host, Nicole Belina. Today, we'll be diving into strategic HR advice for recruiting and developing executive level talent. We're inspired to dig into this topic after seeing that CHROs rank leadership and manager development as their highest priority for 2025, according to SHRM's recent CHRO Priorities and Perspectives report. Joining our conversation today is Jeremy Eskenazi, Managing Principal of Riviera Advisors, an HR consulting firm focused on optimizing talent acquisition. Welcome to Honest HR, Jeremy.
Thanks for having me, Nicole.
So, Jeremy, to start off the recruiting aspect of our episode, I'd love to share 3 trends with you and get your thoughts on them. Number 1, overall employment for top executives is expected to grow by 6% by 2033, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. That's faster than the average for all occupations. Number 2, executive searches typically take several months to complete, according to Robert Half. And finally, there's been an uptick in senior leaders from the baby boom generation retiring, which Forbes has referred to as the silver tsunami. All of these trends seem to suggest there's more demand for executive talent today, along with more pressure to find the right person for the role. But what's your take on the state of executive recruiting, Jeremy?
Well, Nicole, you're right. Demand is growing for these leadership roles, but I also want to say that I think that people who may be listening to this podcast or watching us in the audience may feel like there's a little bit of a dichotomy here because you hear all the time about people getting laid off and the white collar workers getting laid off, but in fact the leadership roles, as you mentioned, that 6% rule is actually true, because there is a dearth of opportunities for those people, and more of those roles continue to stay open longer. So it is a little bit strange for people to hear that there is a lack of those roles, to be a lack of people for those roles to be filled. But it is true. You're right. Demand is growing. But so is the challenge of alignment. So it's no longer about just filling a role. It's about finding the right leader who can drive this transformation of organizations. And honestly, I think that that is what is the biggest misconception about executive recruiting is it's not about skills and finding people who have the right skills. It's about finding the right fit. I also want to just mention before we get into these questions I know you have for me, what is executive recruiting? Like, what does it really mean? And what I just want to share with our audiences is that generally we think about executive recruiting as having those C-level roles and then C-1 and sometimes C-2. That means in the executive leadership team, those C-level people, the people who report to them, and sometimes the people that report to those people. So it's generally titles at the director level and above, but not always.
Thanks for setting the stage there, Jeremy. That's good information. And because I do want to kind of start with the basics as we get into our discussion. And, you've already touched on the fact that it's not just about skills, but it's really about alignment. So that could be strategic alignment, cultural alignment, alignment with the board, right? And who can communicate across diverse stakeholders, for sure. So that's a tall order for an HR team, or I always, have a special place in my heart for that HR department of one who is tasked with their first executive search, right? So, how can HR teams or an HR professional help their organization define what they really need in a senior executive beyond simply a job title or the industry standard?
Absolutely. So the first is obviously you have to start with the business strategy. So what does the organization need to achieve in the next, name the number? It used to be we said the next 3 to 5 years, but that's getting a lot shorter now. So it's almost like what does an organization need in the next 12 to 15 months and then beyond? So you want to build the success profile around those outcomes, not a recycled job description or anything like that, like you mentioned. So shockingly, many HR leaders that I speak to don't always understand or even have access to understand how their organization makes or loses money. Those are table stakes for HR leaders to be able to have the credibility to do this work. And so it is really important that before you start to fill any executive level role, that you clearly understand the business strategy. And if you don't know what the business strategy is, you have to go out and learn what it is. The other thing you can do is really involve key stakeholders in what I call this discovery discussion. So undercover, where the leadership traits, values, and cultural nuances are that will determine success. And who are the stakeholders that you want to ask? Well, those would be the executive leadership team, ELT, board members, as you mentioned, but that also might include subordinates. So talking to some of the key subordinates of this person might also be helpful. Some organizations are funded by private equity, other investors, and things like that. And at a senior level, you might need to go talk to those representatives too, whether they're on the board or not. So that's a little bit about how I might start talking about defining what the needs are.
Those are great points. I love that you've started off with the fact that the HR professional or the HR team has to have great business savvy and have a really good understanding of not just the role, but the organization itself, the strategy, the focus for the foreseeable future. And then something else that you said that's really, really important is getting that 360 view of the role, because it isn't just, who that person will report to, say, on the board, but it is about understanding the role from their peers' perspective, from their direct reports, and even further down. So really getting that big picture is critical.
For sure, for sure.
Now that we, have painted a nice persona of the ideal candidate that we're looking for, what are some effective ways that HR teams can go about sourcing quality executive candidates?
So I have a lot to say about this, Nicole. So bear with me just a moment and just let me pause and say this. One of the biggest issues that I see with HR leaders is handing over the process too quickly to an external firm without aligning internally. So, in my opinion, again, just my opinion, HR should take the lead. They know the culture, they know the politics, and what success really looks like. And another mistake is really over indexing on technical credentials without assessing leadership style, adaptability, or change management skills. And that's really where HR needs to shine. So I will say this: HR leaders who just unilaterally outsource the executive search process, which a lot of people do, um, to a search firm, they lessen their impact, their credibility, and their power. So, first, if you have the capacity to do the sourcing and outreach and then the assessment, my opinion is you should do it. Just because it's always been done with an outside firm in the past doesn't mean you should always have to do that way. Secondly, if you do decide to outsource, then there are many good reasons, and there are many good reasons to do this. For example, if it's a confidential search, but in my opinion, HR leaders should actually lead the search and drive the work hand in hand with an external search person if you choose to do that. Having a search person align with just a hiring leader and stepping away as an admin is a death knell. So, those are just some sort of just, again, starting points here. So you asked me the question about how we can start to source people effectively. First of all, I really believe that leveraging existing networks, board members, investors, alumni, industry peers can be great sources. You can build a strong internal leadership recruiting function that proactively maps talent and builds relationships well before there's an opening. And again, as I said, there are ways to access this talent without first going to an external search firm. So, for example, I'll say this: finding people nowadays, finding them is easy. Converting them, assessing them, that's the hard part. So, the finding and the sourcing, it can be done easily. And we have lots of inexpensive tools now, Nicole, as you know, that can help identify prospects. But it does take time and resources to reach out. So, instead of just pure retained search, you could maybe unbundle this work to specialists at a fraction of the cost, but you as a talent or an HR leader should lead the process. And the last thing I will say on this is don't be cheap, because just because you're not using a search firm doesn't mean you might not have to spend some money to go find talent. So that's a lot to unpack, but that's my opinion.
They're great points because uh, an HR professional who can lead a strong executive search, that really can differentiate an HR professional and certainly uh, add credibility to that person and the department. So, while executive search certainly is not always easy, someone who leads that search and leads it well in an organized way, in a thoughtful way, can be a great differentiator. So I do really love that point. You mentioned networking in a variety of different capacities, whether it's alumni networks, other executives. What advice do you have for an HR professional who might feel a little intimidated by that? Networking with executives, reaching out to them um, to start those conversations.
So a couple of things come to mind, and one of those is what I talked about earlier is that just because you may not use an executive search firm doesn't mean you couldn't use a resource to help you to do those initial calls or contacts. So there are organizations out there today, whether you pay them by a retainer or you pay them for time and the outside expertise, but these are like outside contractors or consultants that you could use that basically can create short lists for you. And they can actually do some of the initial outreach to make the call that the HR professional makes more of a warm call than a cold call. So that's one thing that I just think that HR leaders should think about is that you don't have to make cold calls to people to try to get them to talk to you about a search. Around networking, I would definitely say that even in spite of having to do executive searches, HR leaders, in my mind, should always be networking, whether you have a search open or not. So, for example, if I was in the healthcare industry or I was in the manufacturing industry and I was the head of HR, I would not only be learning about what's going on in HR by listening to this podcast or participating in SHRM activities in my profession, but I would also be spending time in the functional areas that my company is operating in. So if I'm in the healthcare profession, then I want to network with people in the healthcare profession just as much as I do in HR. There are, in fact, networks, organizations that your leaders are members of. Just like we are members of SHRM in HR, there are members of healthcare administrators and manufacturing leaders and things like that. So I definitely suggest to all senior HR leaders that you should really get involved in those types of networks as well before there's a need. So when you have a need, then you kind of can access that. So that's how I would suggest, sort of starting this pipeline process early. Don't just start when you get a search.
Really good points. As they say, your network is your net worth. And I agree with you. The first time I had to do an executive search, it was certainly more reactive, right? And then as you grow as an HR professional and you build your executive network, your network in general, it certainly makes the search a whole lot easier, a lot less stressful when you've got some people in your back pocket that you can tap into to help you with that search.
Absolutely, for sure. And like I said, invest in yourself by making sure that when you hear a C-level colleague is going to a conference, see if you can't tag along or access the network or even engage with them to identify, ways that they can introduce people to you and your organization.
All right, we make those connections with those executives, right? What are some of the best methods HR teams can use to evaluate those executive candidates today? Interviews, assessments, simulations. What do you think?
So a couple of things I would just say is that when you are looking at assessing an executive, the easy part is on the skills side, the technical skills. That's just the same as, recruiting an accountant, identifying that. It's really about assessing their opportunity to be aligned with the rest of the leadership team and your culture, your values, and things like that. So I definitely do value assessment tools. Many organizations do, in fact, use outside assessors. I have no problem, and I definitely suggest that if your organization is very, very engaged in cultural alignment, that you should consider using external assessment tools. And there are many. I mean, we could spend a whole 30 minutes just talking on those. But I would say that the best way to assess is to really assess what your current leadership team, what their values and cultural nuances are first, and develop a baseline benchmark for what the organization is, and then you can use that to actually uh, align with an assessment tool. And sometimes those tools are simple assessment tests and things like that. But the ones that I really like best are those that involve an external trained assessor who will actually be able to align the cultural nuances and goals of your organization's fit and culture with the person that you're actually assessing. So that's my thought. This is not something that you want to do all by yourself.
Right. And you mentioned earlier doing these 360 interviews, if you will, to help you better understand what candidate we're looking for. And so by gathering data from those discussions, that certainly puts you in a nice position to have a good idea of, not just the organization's culture, but as you pointed out, the culture of the executive team.
Absolutely, you're correct.
All right. So in a competitive job market, how can HR teams position their organization as an attractive destination for executive top talent?
So this is a challenge because I don't personally believe that HR is the one that can position the organization to attract top talent by themselves. HR people are facilitators of this process, not the owners of that process, in my mind, because the leadership team and the leadership culture and the nuances that we've been talking about all along are not things that are directly under the control of the HR team or the HR leader. They just simply are facilitating that process. So what they need to do is really clearly understand what the culture is and understand what would make people successful in the organization and what would people want to get out of an organization compared to those that maybe wouldn't fit into the organization. So I think you have to be really clear on your organization's employer brand. And when we talk about employer brand, again, we could go on forever about it, but I would just say that employer brand is not simply some tagline that you make up and you put at the end of every single ad. It's really what make your organization tick and what things people will like about it and what they won't like about it. So it's really important to understand what people would not like about working inside of your organization so that you can actually assess people and attract or repel people who may not fit in that culture. So, really understanding what your employer brand is. And again, like I said, it's not just that tagline, it's really understanding what that is, what it is, and what it isn't. And then using that to help you in your attraction techniques as well as, especially in your assessment techniques.
Great points. So, what are some common mistakes HR teams can make when recruiting executive talent? And what advice do you have for how they can avoid them?
So again, I'll just go back to my original statement. One of the biggest mistakes is really handing over that process too quickly to external firms. And if you do pass it on to an outside executive search firm, you need to be involved and really lead the process. Don't just tee it over. I see it all the time, Nicole. I mean, there are so many HR leaders that will cede that power and that credibility over to an executive search firm. And that's really important. And I'm not saying anything bad about executive search firms. They're very important. But in this case, it's so important that HR leaders get involved. The second thing that I would say is on the candidate experience side, again, this idea of candidate experience applies even more to executive level talent. So every single person you talk to is potentially going to be an ambassador of your organization. And executive level talent speaks more openly about their experiences, and they expect more out of the process. So one of the biggest mistakes is treating executive level talent just like a accountant or a sales rep. You have to give people uh, very specific, transparent feedback at all levels of the process. And I can tell you in my own experiences many, many years ago, I was actually hired as a consultant when I went out on my own as a consultant because I built a great relationship with a senior level person that got declined twice inside of my company. But he got declined in a way that was professional, transparent, and very, very open. I told him, you didn't get the job, and this is why. You didn't fit because of this. I told him those things. And those kind of conversations are terrifying to HR people. When I say this to them, they get really concerned. Oh, I can't say that to a candidate. I can't do that. But that is exactly what executive search firms tell their candidates on your behalf. So you should be able to do that as well. So you got to be practice on that. So that's another big mistake. But I would definitely say candidate experience is very, very important at the executive level. And it is not the same as, again, regular candidate experience, although it should be in my mind.
Really, really, really good points to avoid some messy pitfalls. You're spending so much time with these candidates, and then to have it go the wrong way at the very end is just can be detrimental. And again, providing a great candidate experience, you go back to your earlier point about networking. You never know, where and when you might encounter these candidates,
For
and they may
sure.
be the right candidate that time, right?
For sure. And on this whole candidate experience side, candidates at the executive level, they want more transparency, responsiveness, and a real sense of connection to the company's purpose more than ever. And candidates are, in fact, evaluating the company as much as the company is evaluating them, especially since we're doing a lot of outreach and direct search sourcing and things like that. So that's another reason why HR should be front and center. They're the best ambassadors of the culture, and they can personalize the experience in ways an outside firm really can't.
Sure. We're kindred spirits when it comes to candidate experience and other things for sure, but we could certainly talk about candidate experience, the good, the bad, and the ugly all
For
day,
sure.
every day,
For sure.
for sure. So next time, but if you don't mind, I wanted to move on to developing executive talent. You've given us some really great tips about starting the search and getting our HR professionals through an executive search. Let's talk a little bit about developing executive talent. SHRM recently asked HR executives to rank the leadership behaviors they project will be essential for achieving organizational success in the year 2030. Those top behaviors were strategize, adapt, innovate, inspire, and be transparent. I actually think we've talked about a number of these already in our discussion, right? What types of leadership development approaches would you say are the most impactful to help senior executives really hone in on and master these skills of the future?
Yeah. So I would say that number one, you need experiential learning, not classroom models, things like that, that are sort of training types of things. Peer cohorts, stretch assignments, exposure to other parts of the business build strategic agility in my mind. Um, HR should create space for executives to reflect, experiment, and get feedback. In my mind, innovation and inspiration really grow in environments that are psychologically safe and have high trust. This is a challenge for us in HR because, many people, even our peers at the leadership level, sometimes distrust HR, and we have to show that we are helping to drive this. So transparency, as we talked about before, in particular, has to be modeled at the top. And development really starts with candid, values driven communication from day one. Again, these are sort of big high level concepts. But it really starts with, those kind of experiential things and peer networks and cohorts. One of the things that I really do like is getting people involved in peer cohorts that are outside of your own organization. So this is one thing that I think a lot of people should be aware of is that, there are lots of organizations, similar to the way we have at SHRM. We have the executive network for our own HR leaders at the CHRO level. But there are other organizations that might have that ability to have a peer network and connection to people that are not in HR, but maybe they are in operations or accounting. So that's also another place that people can get development. But I definitely think these peer cohorts, stretch assignments, and exposure to other parts of the business really help, and HR can help drive that.
Yeah, that's great. And, you've talked about some internal and external resources. Speaking of external resources, I wanted to share 44% of organizations offered executive or leadership coaching in 2024, according to SHRM's most recent employee benefit survey. Does that number surprise you in any way? And ultimately, do you see the value of executive coaching and how HR teams can play a role?
Honestly, I would love to see that 44% number higher. Coaching is one of the most highest impact investments you can make in senior talent, in my opinion. And I would say that executives often lack a safe place to process challenges. And a really good, skilled coach can help see blind spots and help make better decisions and grow personally. So I think that HR should normalize coaching as a tool for growth, not mediation or remediation, I should say. So what I mean by that is that sometimes now, I mean, I travel around, I talk to a lot of HR leaders, and they are really proud that they, got some executive leader, a coach, when something is not going on the right track. So they're very proud of that, and I think that's a mistake, by the way. I think that you use coaching as a tool for growth, not remediation, and you help match the right coach to the leader's needs and stage in their career. Don't use coaching when there's a problem only. That's my suggestion.
Yeah, I love that. I'll tell you here at SHRM, last year we rolled out coaching, in a positive way for starting with managers and above. And so, we're helping our leaders early on get used to having those coaching conversations and leverage that resource. So it's not even just at the executive level, but early on. And many of our people managers really see it as just that. It's a reward, it's a benefit rather than, a remedial step, last step.
I agree. I agree. That's great. Yeah, that's great. There are a lot of other feedback mechanisms that really actually work for senior leaders. I think coaching is one of them. Not all organizations can really do it or afford it. Like we talked about early on the assessment side, 360 feedback is still valuable even inside of this for development, but only when it's paired with skilled debriefing and follow up support too. So I think HR can help to create those sort of truth telling spaces and small group sessions or even reverse mentoring where upward feedback feels safe and meaningful. So you don't always have to just use a coach. Coaching is costly and expensive, and not every single organization can afford it. So there are other things you can do as an HR leader that could potentially take the space of that too.
Wonderful. So we're running out of time here, but I have one more question for you, which is how can our HR teams ensure that senior executives are not only continuing to develop their own leadership skills, but giving back, right? Mentoring and growing their next generation of leaders?
So again, I don't think this should come directly from HR. HR is a facilitator. Um, but I think it's making leadership development part of their scorecard. If they are not growing others, they're not doing the full job. I think HR should build formal mentoring programs, but also reinforce informal coaching expectations as a part of executive culture. And I think also we need to highlight and reward leaders who create talent pipelines. It sends a strong message about what's valued. Again, these things can start in HR's sort of sandbox, but they have to be part of the leadership team and it can't be HR's program. So, for example, you can't create a scorecard that's driven by HR. It has to be driven by senior leadership overall. Otherwise, it will not be credible or valued. So, I think those are some ways that we could really impart making sure that executives develop others as well.
I'd argue that coaching can be part of the culture of an organization, right?
For sure.
And that's going to do it for this week's episode of Honest HR. A big thank you to you, Jeremy, for sharing your insights with us. Honest HR is a part of SHRM's HR Daily flagship content series. You can head to shrm.org/HR Daily to learn more and sign up for our newsletter. You can also catch us on SHRM social media. Be sure to like, comment, and be part of the conversation. Thank you for joining us, and see you next time.
SHRM.
This podcast is approved for zero point 0.5 professional development credits, aka PDCs, toward SHRM CP and SHRM SCP recertification. Enter the following PDC activity ID in your SHRM activity portal to log your credit: 26-429UD. That's 26-429UD. This ID expires on July 1st, 2026.